there was a pretty interesting article put out by the Daily News. So that's the UK's big thing. And it was talking about this undercover investigation done by a group called the News Movement, which I assume is just a media group in the UK. So they had somebody on their news staff pose as a 24-year-old who was contacting several plastic surgery facilities in Istanbul. So just like we have these medical tourism places in Mexico and the Dominican Republic, being here in the United States, if you live in Europe or the UK, all the big ones are in Turkey, right? And so it's a really big deal for people in Europe to go to Turkey to get really cheap plastic surgery. It's the same medical tourism we have here. It's just in a different place.
Right.
And so this 24-year-old posed as somebody who was looking into plastic surgery, and she reached out to all these places in Turkey. And she immediately, like her WhatsApp or Instagram or whatever she was using, started to get blown up with all of these like really kind of high pressure tactics.
Yeah.
And that's really looked down upon in the UK. It's not something we see a lot here in the United States, and I'm not sure we see it from the medical tourism places in the Caribbean. I haven't heard that, but apparently the Turkey ones are really aggressive, and they say, if you book in the next 24 hours, then you get this much discount, and every day you wait, it's just going to get more expensive. And they're like really pressuring people to try and put a down payment on these plastic surgeries.
Interesting.
And so, of course, like the British people are they don't like that, because in the UK, it's actually illegal to do pressure sales for things like plastic surgery. That's like against the law. And then it made me think, is that against the law in the United States? I don't think it is. I think it's okay in the United States for us to say something like, if you do the surgery or if you book it in the next week, you get X amount off. In fact, we do discounts and stuff. I mean,
right.
I wouldn't say it's high pressure, but we do give incentives for people to book surgeries. Mm-hmm. And so once this came out, then of course the NHS National Health Services. That's right, isn't that right?
You'd know better.
National Health Services, is that right?
Probably.
I think that's right. So the NHS, which is basically the national health care for the UK, mm-hmm. got wind of this report about these high pressure sales in Turkey, and then they came out and said that, basically issuing warnings about not doing medical tourism, which I was glad to see. You guys know how I feel about medical tourism. I'm 100% against it.
Are they just like specifically targeting the UK?
I think that they probably do. That wasn't really mentioned in this particular article, but they know that people from the UK come to Turkey to get cheap plastic surgery. Because just like in the United States,
Mexico.
Yeah, right. It's their equivalent of like going to Mexico. Yes, because you can fly to Turkey really cheap from the UK. Like the flights are really cheap, and then of course everything is cheaper there.
Yeah.
But the NHS issued all these warnings about what bad things could happen if you do medical tourism, and then they actually had a couple slides. Travis, can you roll that slide? Did we do the header one? I can't remember. All right, but this is the next one. So this is basically a slide that the NHS put out talking about how much money is being spent on complications from people having surgery in Turkey, or just medical tourism in general. And apparently over a 5-year period, they spent between $6 and $7 million in health bills for fixing complications from medical tourism.
Yikes.
And I mean, on the face, $6 to $7 million doesn't sound like a lot, but you gotta remember the UK doesn't have near the population that we do in the United States. This would be like $100 million in the U.S. based on per capita, or maybe not exactly, but you get my drift that this is a much smaller company. And of course, the NHS, like in the United States, if you go to Mexico and have a surgery and it gets botched, then either your private insurance is going to pay for it, or you're going to pay out of pocket, right? So, I mean, at this point, the private insurances are not like complaining about this because it's just kind of a blip on their radar, because a lot of these patients don't have insurance; they're going out of state or out of the country anyway. So no one here in the United States is really, sounding an alarm except for me. I'm like the one guy. It's like, this is a bad idea. Don't do this.
Yeah.
But in the UK, because their government has to pay for the complications, now you have the UK government coming out and saying
they don't have private insurance.
And everyone's insured through NHS, right? So the government's on the hook.
That's why it's such a big deal.
It's a big deal because the government now has to pay for these complications, and the government itself is coming out and saying medical tourism is bad. We don't have that in the United States because the government doesn't care. Why do they care? Like, they're not paying for it.
Right.
It's either people paying out of pocket or it's private insurance. And private insurance is, there's so many private insurance companies that, they may have one or, 2 people every month to do it, but it's not enough. But when it's one thing, when it's the NHS, which is the only game in town, and they're having to pay like $7 million to pay for all of these people's complications, then they're coming out and say it's a bad idea.
Yeah,
So
I wouldn't either.
I was actually glad to see that. You know, you guys know I hate medical tourism. And for those who haven't heard my soapbox about medical tourism, get ready because I'm about to tell you. So the problems with medical tourism is, number one, there is the question of regulation. In the United States, plastic surgery is pretty regulated, as it is in the UK. You should know that your doctor is qualified to do the procedure, that the facility you're having it has been inspected. And when you go out of the country, places like Turkey, Mexico, Dominican Republic, you don't have that. You don't know what you're getting. You don't know if your doctor's been properly trained. You don't know if the facility has been vetted.
Right.
And so there is a definitely increased risk of complications from people that go out of the country to have surgery. The doctor-patient relationship is very abbreviated or completely eliminated because you end up talking to somebody over the internet about what surgeries you want, as opposed to here in the United States where you go and you have like an hour-long consult to kind of go over what you want. And then finally, the post-op recovery, or probably the post-op care is really non-existent. You go in there one time, you see maybe a nurse, and then you go out back to your whatever country you're from, and then if you have complications, there's no one there to help you. Your doctor's in another country. And so, as I've said in the past, I see on average 1 to 2 patients per month that
fixing other people's messes.
that went out of the country to have plastic surgery and then end up in the ER. And I'm always a sucker. A lot of plastic surgeons will flat out say, no, I'm not taking care of that because they don't want to deal with it. But I'm still a nice guy, and so I take on these cases. And some of them are hard. I have a girl right now that really got botched pretty bad. And
Where did she go?
She went to Mexico. I was trying to remember because I had two last month, and one was Mexico and one was the other. This one went to Mexico. Yeah.
Yikes.
And she had a pretty bad problem. Like she got really lucky.
Was it like a tummy tuck?
Yeah, it was a tummy tuck, and like
Those ones scare me.
The whole thing opened up, and at first I told her, I was like, "You're just gonna have to let this heal," and then I ended up having to take her to surgery because she wasn't doing good, and I was like, "If everything looks perfect, I might try to close it for you. Otherwise, you're just gonna have to wait months for this to heal." And it looked pretty good, and so I did end up closing her, and luckily she's done fine.
Okay.
Like she literally just dodged a huge bullet.
Good.
Which I feel like I could take a little bit of credit for that. But I mean,
so.
But she could have been in a really, really bad way if she'd gone elsewhere or nobody wanted to touch her. Like she would have had a wound for 6 months. So, but anyway, it was interesting to see the UK speaking out against that, and I get it, right? Because the NHS has to pay for their complications. Yeah. So anyway, if you know people who are thinking about medical tourism, and this is not about me trying to get more money because, obviously people who do medical tourism go anywhere to get plastic surgery. It's just about safety.
Yeah.
You go out of the country to do this, your complication rate's much higher, and if you have any complications, you end up paying more than if you just done it in the United States.
Right.
So medical tourism, bad.
I mean, at the end of the day, surgery is a big deal.
It is a big deal.
And
like you don't want cut rate surgery.
Even if it is not something you have to live, it's still
right. Elective
somebody
surgery
is cutting into you.
Right, and the risk of complications can be dire. I mean, you can literally die. I mean, there are stories of people who went out of the country for plastic surgery and ended up dying. I mean,
for sure,
that does happen. So
I can believe it.
Bad stuff. Charles, plastic surgery out of the country? No.
That's a no-go for me.
All right, good.
Yeah, I get my plastic surgery in the country only.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, locally.
He's had a lot of work done.
Yeah, a lot. I have nipple implants.
Oh my God.
Real. They are just implants.